During the ceremony, the priest dropped holy water on Robbie's forehead, thinking it was just a symbolic blessing. But the moment the water touched his skin, Robbie jerked violently, his body twisting as if it were being scorched by flames. Heat seemed to rise off him, and his screams tore through the night. He clawed at his own skin, thrashing desperately, shouting over and over, "It burns! It burns! Stop it!" His voice sounded like both a child's cry and something ancient and malevolent speaking through the boy's throat. In 1949, a bizarre case took place in St. Louis, Missouri, one that still fuels debate between theologians and psychologists to this day. That winter, a 13-year-old boy, once a quiet, shy, and average student, underwent a disturbing transformation in just a few short weeks. During the day, he remained withdrawn and reserved around his classmates at school, but at night, deep growls echoed from his bedroom. The sounds didn't resemble a child's voice at all. They were closer to that of a grown man, sometimes mixed with guttural, animal-like howls. Neighbors who overheard it often wondered if something terrifying was hidden inside that room. Even more chilling, his family claimed that at times the boy suddenly spoke in strange, unfamiliar languages, as though chanting ancient incantations. Among them were recognizable fragments of Old Latin and German, languages he had never studied or been exposed to before. What seemed most unbelievable was what followed. After these chants, the furniture in his room appeared to be controlled by an unseen force. Crucifixes fixed tightly on the walls fell to the ground. Chairs slid across the floor on their own. Books flew off shelves, and even his bed shook violently, as if some immense power was driving it all. These accounts weren't just neighborhood gossip. They were documented in detail by Father William Bowdern, one of the priests involved, in what became known as his Exorcism diary. That diary later turned into one of the most famous records in modern religious history. In his notes about the boy, every line conveyed scenes beyond ordinary understanding. Night after night, the boy seemed possessed by Satan himself. Lash-like wounds appeared on his body without explanation, and words like evil surfaced across his forehead, as though some force was using his skin as a canvas to send messages to the outside world. To this day, the boy's true identity is protected under the pseudonym Robbie, and it was Robbie's terrifying ordeal that went on to inspire the legendary film The Exorcist. So what exactly did Robbie go through? Was he really possessed by Satan? To understand, we need to go back to the winter of 1949. That year, America was just beginning to step out of the ruins and fear left behind by World War II. The joy of victory had not yet erased the shadow of death and destruction. At the same time, the Cold War was quietly casting its gloom, and the standoff between the US and the Soviet Union filled people's hearts with anxiety. Technology was advancing at breakneck speed, and the terrifying power of the atomic bomb made humanity realize for the first time that total destruction was a real possibility. In this atmosphere of contradiction and unease, the need for spiritual comfort was stronger than ever. Churches, prayers, and faith became the only source of strength many families had to fight off fear. It was on this uneasy ground that the case of an ordinary middle-class boy, said to be possessed by Satan and later exorcised, unexpectedly became the focus of national attention. Robbie, a 13-year-old boy, wasn't much different from thousands of kids his age. He was introverted, quiet, and preferred staying home rather than being social. His parents often worried about his withdrawn nature, but in those days, a quiet child was often seen as well-behaved and sensible. So Robbie's parents didn't interfere much in his life. Robbie's only true emotional anchor was his aunt. Robbie's aunt was quite eccentric. She had a deep fascination with the occult and paranormal phenomena, even collecting books about seances and witchcraft. To the rest of the family, her constant talk about strange topics of gods and spirits seemed almost mystical or rambling. But to Robbie, she was the only one who truly understood him. Spending so much time with her gave him an unusual worldview. She told Robbie that there were countless beings in the world invisible to human eyes, and that people could, through certain means, communicate with these unseen entities. So, Robbie's aunt handed him a Ouija board and personally taught him how to use it. Maybe in her eyes, it was nothing more than a game to play with a child. At night, in a dimly lit room, Robbie and his aunt would place their fingers lightly on the planchette, trying to speak with unseen beings hidden in the darkness. The planchette would slowly slide across the board, spelling out words and sentences that made their hearts race. With a mix of curiosity and fear, Robbie kept asking those unseen presences one question after another. At that time, Robbie was still so young that he didn't realize this seemingly harmless act was like striking a match in the crack of a door. The turning point came after his aunt suddenly passed away. Losing his beloved aunt plunged Robbie into deep grief. He began using the Ouija board frequently, hoping to hear her voice again. But from that moment on, a series of unexplainable events started happening in the house. Late at night, scratching noises often came from inside the walls, as if something was desperately trying to claw its way out. The floorboards in his bedroom creaked and groaned, and footsteps echoed through the empty hallway. Even the furniture seemed to lose its weight, sometimes sliding across the floor, sometimes even lifting into the air and hanging there. The most terrifying part, however, was Robbie's own transformation. He would often jolt awake in the middle of the night, his body convulsing violently, as if pinned down by an invisible force. Over time, red welts began to appear on his skin, lined up in neat rows, as if invisible hands were clawing and torturing him. At first, his family thought it might be a medical condition, so they took him to see a doctor. But the diagnosis only deepened their confusion. Robbie's test results showed that everything in his body was normal. His blood work, nervous system, and overall health were all fine. When science failed to explain, fear spread quickly, like night falling over the household. With nowhere else to turn, Robbie's parents placed all their hope in the church. They went to the local pastor, begging the clergy to pray for their son and even perform an exorcism. For Robbie's family, this was no longer just seeking help. It was an act of pure desperation. And that step marked the true beginning of the entire ordeal. No one could have predicted that this seemingly ordinary boy would soon become the central figure in the most famous exorcism case in American history. At first, the priests themselves were skeptical of what Robbie's parents described. After all, in their view, many so-called paranormal phenomena could be explained by psychology or medicine, but their doubts were shaken the moment they saw Robbie lying in bed. His face, which should have been soft and childlike, twisted into something grotesque and demonic. The entire bed frame shook violently as if shoved by an unseen force, the wooden legs scraping loudly across the floor. At that point, the priest's rationality and skepticism began to crumble. According to the exorcism diary, when the priest saw Robbie in that state, they immediately prepared for the ritual. During the ceremony, the priest dropped holy water on Robbie's forehead, thinking it was just a symbolic blessing. But the moment the water touched his skin, Robbie jerked violently, his body twisting as if it were being scorched by flames. Heat seemed to rise off him, and his screams tore through the night. He clawed at his own skin, thrashing desperately, shouting over and over, "It burns! It burns! Stop it!" His voice sounded like both a child's cry and something ancient and malevolent speaking through the boy's throat. The exorcism that followed grew even more terrifying. As the priest read Bible verses aloud, the room echoed with the name of the Lord. Robbie suddenly roared out blasphemous curses, mocking God and the Virgin Mary. His face twisted with rage, his eyes turned black and hollow, and drool spilled from his mouth as he spat out endless profanity. In their diaries, the priests admitted that in that moment, they didn't feel like they were witnessing a psychological illness. They felt the raw fear of confronting evil itself. As the ritual went on, strange markings began appearing on Robbie's body. These weren't ordinary wounds, but scratches forming words, as if invisible claws were carving them into his skin. The priests stared at the bloody red imprints rising from his flesh, barely able to believe their eyes. They tried to rationalize it, but in the end, their trembling hands could only write in the diary, "Robbie's body is being occupied by some force." What made it even more horrifying was that this exorcism wasn't a one-time ordeal. It dragged on for weeks across multiple locations, from Robbie's bedroom to a monastery in St. Louis. Each night, wherever the ritual was performed, the lights would flicker as if darkness was swallowing the room. Furniture would suddenly shatter, sending pieces flying across the floor. Most of the time, Robbie was pinned down on the bed, his body convulsing violently, while the words pouring from his mouth grew more and more unrecognizable. More than once he screamed, "This is my body. It belongs to Satan." That voice sent a chill straight through everyone present. It said that during the final ritual, on the eve of Easter, the atmosphere in the room was so heavy it felt frozen solid. The priests gathered around Robbie, their prayers rising one after another. At the most critical moment, Robbie suddenly let out a piercing scream, his entire body convulsing violently, and then silence. A long, unbearable silence filled the room until, at last, Robbie opened his eyes. In a calm, almost gentle voice, he said, "I'm free." Everyone in the room froze in disbelief. If the story had ended there, maybe we could chalk it up to a matter of faith. A religious tale that you either believe or you don't. But what makes this case a true mystery are a few questions that simply can't be ignored. First, the saint. Louis' exorcism left behind plenty of eyewitnesses and written records, making it much harder to dismiss as just a piece of folklore. The original diary from the church is still archived in Jesuit records today, and even decades later, some of the priest's family members insisted they had personally witnessed supernatural forces at work. Second, Robbie's later life is almost a complete blank. After the church sent him back to live a normal life, he changed his name and vanished from public view. It wasn't until decades later that researchers managed to trace his identity, only to discover he had no history of mental illness and had lived what appeared to be a relatively normal life. That puzzled many. If his condition was purely psychological, how could it have been so extreme in the short term, only to vanish completely after the exorcism? Finally, science still can't fully explain the details. Psychologists have tried to interpret the case through ideas like group suggestion, family stress, or epilepsy, but they've never been able to account for certain things, like Robbie speaking Latin, objects moving on their own, or multiple witnesses experiencing the same phenomena. And so humanity's fear of the unknown often feels more terrifying than the unknown itself. Some believe this case is undeniable proof of Satan breaking into the human world, the most authentic exorcism in Catholic history. Others think it was simply a projection of America's Cold War anxieties, with a child unintentionally becoming the vessel. But here's the unsettling part. No matter which explanation you choose, none of them are entirely comforting. The diary still exists, the priest's testimonies are still there, and Robbie's life remains wrapped in mystery.